My husband said during an argument, "I left a better woman for you. Maybe that was my mistake." The room went silent. I didn't shatter. I didn't scream. I just looked at him, standing there in the library I had designed, holding a glass of scotch I had paid for. I replied softly, "Then go fix your mistake." And I walked out. Late that night he texted, "We need to talk, now." But when he saw what was waiting outside the house, he couldn't even speak. Before I tell you what he found waiting in the driveway, drop a comment and let me know. What is the one sentence in an argument that you could never forgive? I want to know where you draw the line. 40 minutes after my husband told me I was a downgrade, I wasn't sobbing in a supermarket parking lot. There were no frantic calls to my mother asking where I went wrong. I was standing at the front desk of the downtown Ritz-Carlton, handing a black titanium credit card to a concierge named David. He asked if I was celebrating a special occasion. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "A new acquisition." The room was on the 14th floor. It smelled like white tea and expensive neutrality. When the door clicked shut behind me, the silence was heavy. But it wasn't the suffocating silence of the house I had just left. That house was filled with the noise of things unsaid. This room was empty, and for the first time in years, empty felt like luxury. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed and waited for the crash. I waited for the tears, the hyperventilating, the urge to throw a vase against the wall. That is what a heartbroken wife is supposed to do, isn't it? But nothing came. My pulse was steady at 62 beats per minute. My hands weren't shaking. That is when I realized what had happened in the library. People talk about falling out of love like it is a slow fade, a gradual erosion of stone. But sometimes it is a switch, a mechanical, violent, irreversible click. When Christopher looked at me and said he had settled, he didn't just hurt my feelings, he breached the contract. He effectively announced that he was no longer my partner. He was a liability I had been carrying for too long. In that library, I didn't stay silent because I was weak. I stayed silent because I was calculating. Screaming requires energy. Arguing requires hope. Hope that the other person will understand you, that they will change, that they are worth the fight. Silence is what happens when you realize the investment has reached zero value. I didn't want to explain my worth to him anymore. I wanted to liquidate my assets. I walked over to the desk and opened my laptop. The blue light of the screen was the only illumination in the room. I didn't open my photo gallery. I didn't scroll through Instagram to see if he was online. I opened a secure folder on my cloud drive labeled Bungalow Assets. Inside were the documents Christopher had conveniently forgotten about during his nostalgic trips down memory lane. The deed to the house, the renovation receipts, the bank statements showing the down payment wired from my personal savings account 3 years before we were married. He thought he lived in our house. He thought his name was on the mortgage because he bought the groceries and mowed the lawn. But in the state of California, and specifically under the terms of the trust I had set up when I was 24, he was a tenant who had just violated the terms of his lease. I pulled up the contact for my sister, Amanda. She is a shark in a pinstripe suit, a woman who had told me on my wedding day that I was marrying a project, not a partner. I had defended him then. I had told her she was cynical. I typed 2 words into the message bar. Green light. 3 seconds later, the typing bubble appeared. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't offer condolences. She replied with a single address. The contact card for a private security firm she used for high-risk evictions. I set the phone down. I ordered a club sandwich from room service. And then I went to sleep. It was the deepest sleep I had had in 11 years. The most dangerous lie I ever told myself was that potential is the same thing as reality. I met Christopher 11 years ago. Back then, he wasn't a sleek tech consultant with a tailored wardrobe and a membership to a co-working space. He was a freelance coder with a credit score in the low 500s, and a philosophy that deadlines were oppressive suggestions. Most women would have seen a red flag. I saw a project. I am a landscape architect. My entire career is built on looking at a patch of dead dirt and seeing a thriving garden. I look at structure, drainage, and foundation. I don't see what is there. I see what could be there if I just apply enough labor. That is exactly how I treated Christopher. And it is exactly how I treated the bungalow. I bought the house 4 years ago. It was a 1920s craftsman with good bones but terrible history. The roof leaked, the wiring was a fire hazard, and the previous owners had painted the original mahogany trim a sickly shade of yellow. My sister Amanda told me to bulldoze it. She said, "Lauren, it is a money pit." I told her it just needs someone to see its value. For the next 4 years, I spent every weekend restoring that house. I stripped the paint by hand, inhaling dust for hours until my wood revealed its true grain. I rewired the electrical grid. I turned a disaster into a masterpiece. And while I was sanding floors, I was also sanding down Christopher. I paid off his student loans so he wouldn't drown in interest. I rewrote his resumes because he refused to learn corporate formatting. I introduced him to my network, coached him on how to shake hands, how to negotiate, how to be the man he claimed he wanted to be. I convinced myself this was love. It wasn't. It was the sunk cost fallacy. In economics, the sunk cost fallacy is the trap where you refuse to abandon a failing investment simply because you have already poured so much into it. You think, I can't leave now. I have spent 10 years fixing him. If I leave, I lose that equity. If I stay, maybe, just maybe, he will finally yield a return. I treated my marriage like a renovation that was constantly over budget and behind schedule.
If I was just more patient, eventually the better man would emerge from the sawdust.
But standing in that hotel room, looking at the city lights, I finally admitted the truth. The man I built didn't belong to me. I had constructed a pedestal, polished it until it gleamed, and then helped him climb up onto it. And from that height, the first thing he did was look down and tell me I wasn't good enough. He didn't hate me because I was a bad wife. He resented me because I was the only one who remembered who he was before the polish. I was the witness to his construction, and he wanted to be a self-made man. I had spent 11 years waiting for a return on investment that was never coming. It was time to stop the bleeding. It was time to close the account. The devaluation of my stock didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, deliberate market correction that started 6 months ago. At first, it was just the drift. Late nights at the co-working space, weekend conferences that suddenly required overnight stays. The password on his phone changed from our anniversary date to something random. When I asked him about it, he called me paranoid. He used the word suffocating 3 times in 1 week. Then came the mentions of her. He never used her name in a way that sounded like cheating. It was more insidious than that. He used her as a benchmark. I was listening to this old playlist, he'd say, over a dinner I had spent 2 hours cooking. It reminded me of when I lived in the city. My ex, she really understood music. She had this chaotic, artistic energy. She challenged my potential. He would pause, take a sip of wine, and look at me with a pitying smile. You're good at managing my comfort, Lauren. You keep things stable. But sometimes, stability feels like a cage. There it was, the dichotomy he had invented to justify his boredom. The muse versus the manager. In his rewritten history, she was the wild, intellectual spark that fueled his genius. I was the boring logistical engine that merely paid the bills. He forgot that the chaos he missed so much was actually him sleeping on a futon and eating instant noodles before I rescued him. The arguments became a nightly ritual. I would ask a simple logistical question. Will you be home for the contractors tomorrow? And he would explode. You're so controlling, he'd shout. You treat this marriage like a spreadsheet. Not everything has to be scheduled. She never made me feel like an employee in my own life. For months, I internalized this. I wondered if I was too rigid. I tried to be more spontaneous. I stopped asking about his schedule. I tried to be the cool wife. But standing in that hotel room, stripped of the need to please him, the truth finally clicked into place. This is what psychologists call the phantom rival. Christopher wasn't in love with this other woman. He hadn't seen her in a decade. He didn't know who she was now. She was probably just as tired and responsible as I was. No, he wasn't in love with her. He was in love with the version of himself that existed when he was with her. He missed being 25. He missed having no mortgage, no career pressure, and no expectations. He missed the boy who could dream about being a CEO without actually having to do the work. And he resented me because I represented the reality of adulthood. I was the living, breathing reminder that he had grown up. Every time he looked at me, he saw the mortgage, the insurance premiums, and the discipline required to maintain the life he claimed he wanted. He didn't want a better woman. He wanted a time machine. He wanted to go back to being a starving artist, but he wanted to do it while living in $1 million bungalow renovated on my dime. He wanted the fantasy of the muse with the financial security of the manager. He wanted to have his cake and let me pay for it too. The next morning, I didn't wake up with a hangover. I woke up with a strategy. I met my sister Amanda in the hotel restaurant at 7 a.m. sharp. She had already drafted the paperwork. On the table between our coffees sat a document titled Notice of Exclusion. In the world of construction, when a contractor violates safety protocols or threatens the integrity of a job site, you don't ask them nicely to leave. You revoke their clearance. You change the gate codes. You escort them off the property to ensure they don't steal the copper wiring on their way out. The house is in the trust, Amanda said, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. He has no claim to the title. But since he's established residency, he could drag this out for months if we let him play the abandoned husband card. He won't, I said, signing my name at the bottom. I'm hiring a private security detail to secure the perimeter at noon. By the time he gets back from his co-working space, the locks will be digital and his access code will be deleted. Amanda looked at me. You're treating this like a hostile corporate takeover. It is, I replied. He's a liability on the balance sheet. I'm just balancing the books. I was feeling almost clinical about it. Cold, efficient. But then my phone vibrated against the white tablecloth. One notification. Instagram. I stared at the screen. The username was unfamiliar, but the profile picture was unmistakable. It was her, the muse. The woman Christopher had spent 6 months painting as the one that got away. The artistic soul who was too free-spirited for a mortgage. I expected a taunt. I expected a message telling me that true love had won and I should step aside. Instead, there were 3 words. Check your DM. I opened the message. There were no insults, no apologies, just a series of 5 screenshots, time-stamped from last night, hours after I had walked out of the library. They were texts from Christopher to her. Screenshot 1. She finally left. I told you she was suffocating me. I'm free. Screenshot 2. I can finally breathe. I'm coming to see you. We can start planning the trip. Screenshot 3. Don't worry about the money. The bungalow has appreciated like crazy. Once the divorce is finalized, I'll force the sale. We're looking at $600,000 in equity. Easy. That's enough to fund us for 2 years in Europe while I work on my startup. I stopped breathing. The air in the restaurant seemed to vanish. Screenshot 4. She thinks she's smart, but she's desperate to keep me. She'll settle just to avoid a fight. And then I'm all yours. And then a final message from her to me. I don't date married men, and I definitely don't date men who plan to steal from their wives. I thought you should see the budget proposal he sent me. I set the phone down. My hands were trembling, not from sadness, but from a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. This wasn't just a breakup anymore. This wasn't just a man having a midlife crisis and missing his youth. Christopher hadn't just compared me to her to hurt my feelings. He had done it to destabilize me. He wanted me insecure, weak, and desperate, so that when the time came, I would sign over half the equity of the home I had bought, I had restored, and I had paid for just to keep him around. He wasn't a confused romantic searching for his muse. He was a grifter searching for a financier. He planned to sell my life's work, the hand-sanded floors, the garden I had planted bulb by bulb, the sanctuary I had built with my own sweat, to fund a 2-year vacation with another woman. I looked up at Amanda. The clinical detachment was gone. In its place was something much more dangerous. "Change the plan," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I don't just want the locks changed. I want the staging crew." "The staging crew?" Amanda asked, confused. "I'm listing the house," I lied. "Or at least, I'm going to make it look like I am. If he wants to talk about forcing a sale, I'll show him exactly what it looks like when the owner decides to close the business." I picked up my phone and typed a reply to the Muse. "Thank you. I'll handle the eviction." At 5:15 p.m., Christopher pulled his Audi into the driveway. He wasn't coming home to apologize. I knew his schedule. I knew his patterns. He was coming home to negotiate. He had probably spent the day at his co-working space, drafting a mental speech about how he was confused and how we needed to reevaluate our assets. He expected to find me at the kitchen table, red-eyed and desperate, ready to sign whatever post-nuptial agreement he slid across the granite just to keep him. Instead, he found a 26-foot box truck blocking the garage. The truck had elite interiors, staging and design, painted on the side in gold letters. 2 men in blue coveralls were walking out the front door, carrying a stack of cardboard boxes. My phone rang at 5:17. I was sitting in the hotel suite, watching the security feed on my iPad. I had installed a camera at the front gate 3 years ago to monitor package deliveries. Now, I was watching the delivery of justice. I let it ring twice. Then I answered, putting the call on speaker. I didn't say hello. "What the hell is going on?" Christopher shouted. The background noise was a mix of diesel engine idle and his own panic. "Why is there a truck in the driveway? Why are these guys taking my things?" "They aren't taking your things," I said, my voice smooth and leveled. "They are decluttering." "Decluttering? They have my golf clubs. They have my desktop. Lauren, call them off right now." "I can't do that," I said. "They are on a tight schedule. I listed the house for a renovation assessment this morning. My broker advised that we need to depersonalize the space to maximize its value. The market doesn't respond well to the personal effects of a tenant who doesn't pay rent." There was a silence on the line. Then the sound of a car door slamming. "I live here," he screamed. "You can't just list the house. I own half of this equity." "Check your email, Christopher," I said. "Amanda sent over the trust documents an hour ago. You don't own equity. You own a sense of entitlement, and unfortunately, that is not a liquid asset." On the video feed, I saw him try to push past the security guard I had hired, a man named Marcus who was 6'4" and had spent 10 years in the Marines. Marcus didn't shove him. He just stepped into Christopher's path like a human wall. "You're locking me out?" Christopher's voice cracked. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" "I assumed you had plans," I said. "According to the screenshots your muse sent me this morning, you were quite eager to cash out my bungalow and take her to Europe. I'm just helping you expedite the process. The house is being emptied. The locks have been changed. You are free to go find your inspiration." "She sent you what?" The arrogance evaporated instantly. It was replaced by the hollow, sickening sound of realization. "The texts, Christopher. The ones where you promised to sell my life's work to fund your affair. She forwarded everything. Apparently she has standards." "Lauren, wait, please." He was pleading now. I watched him on the screen, running a hand through his hair, looking small against the backdrop of the house I had built. "She blocked me. I tried to call her when I saw the truck. She won't answer." "I know," I said. "She told me she doesn't date men who steal." "I have nowhere to go," he whispered. "Lauren, seriously, my parents are in Florida. All my friends are, they're mutual friends. I can't tell them this." "That sounds like a logistical problem," I said. "And as you pointed out yesterday, I am just a manager. I manage comfort. But since I resigned from that position, your comfort is no longer my department. Don't do this, he sobbed. I love you. No, I said softly. You love the safety net, but the net is gone. I watched the movers load the last box, his high-end gaming chair, into the truck. Marcus, the security guard, crossed his arms, looking at Christopher with bored indifference. The staging crew has strict instructions to leave your boxes at the curb once the truck pulls away, I said. I suggest you load them into your car before it starts raining. I heard there's a storm coming. I didn't wait for his response. I pressed the red icon on my screen. The line went dead. On the video feed, I saw him drop his phone to his side, staring at the closed front door of the bungalow. The porch light flickered on, automatic, timed, welcoming. But it wasn't welcoming him. It was illuminating the no trespassing sign Marcus had just staked into the lawn. 24 hours after the staging crew pulled away, I walked back into my house. The security guard Marcus was still parked at the gate, but the driveway was empty. There was no Audi, no boxes on the curb, uninterrupted line of the slate walkway I had laid with my own hands 3 years ago. I unlocked the front door, using the new digital code, and stepped inside. I expected the house to feel empty. People always talk about the void left behind when a marriage ends. They talk about the silence being deafening, about the ghost of the other person haunting the hallways. I was braced for the impact of loneliness. But as I walked through the living room, past the original mahogany trim I had stripped and stained, I didn't feel a void. I felt space. The air quality was different. It was lighter. The subtle low-frequency hum of Christopher's anxiety, the constant need for validation, the unspoken complaints, the walking on eggshells was gone. The house didn't feel abandoned. It felt reclaimed. I walked into the library, the scene of the crime. The glass of scotch was gone. The coaster was put away. I sat in the leather chair and looked out at the garden I had designed. For 11 years, I had been terrified of being alone. It is the fear that keeps so many of us in bad contracts. The idea that a bad partner is better than no partner. We are taught that a woman alone is a tragedy, unfinished business, a room waiting to be furnished. But sitting there, in the absolute stillness of my own home, I realized the truth. I hadn't been afraid of being alone. I had been afraid of the stigma of being alone. The reality of it? The reality was peace. I realized I hadn't lost a partner. I had evicted a squatter. Christopher hadn't been sharing this life with me. He had been occupying it. He consumed the space, the energy, and the resources, but he never contributed to the foundation. He was structural damage masquerading as a load-bearing wall. And now that the demolition was done, I could finally see the blueprints clearly again. This is what I call the self-partnered realization. It is not about giving up on love. It is about realizing that the primary relationship in your life is the one you have with yourself. If you cannot sit in an empty room with your own thoughts and feel at peace, you will always be vulnerable to people who sell you a cheap version of companionship in exchange for your self-worth. I opened my laptop one last time. There was one folder left on my desktop. It was labeled Christopher, Career and Docs. It contained 11 years of his resumes I had edited, his tax returns I had filed, the loan consolidation plans I had drafted. It was the archive of my unpaid labor. I didn't open it. I didn't look for a file to keep as a souvenir. I dragged the folder to the trash bin. Then I clicked empty trash. A small dialog box popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently erase these items? This action cannot be undone. I smiled. That is the point, I whispered. I clicked yes. The progress bar flashed for a second, and then it was gone. The screen was clean. My husband told me he left a better woman for me. He thought that was an insult. But in the end, he was right. He did leave a better woman. He left me, and in doing so, he gave me the chance to finally meet her. If you've ever had to remind someone of your worth by removing your presence, share this story. You are the architect of your own life, Don't let anyone treat you like a temporary rental.